So welcome to our third session this week in our masterclass. This month, our topic is going to be, or has been, the psychology of clutter. Wait, let me start that again. Hi, welcome to this third session of our masterclass. This month, we are talking about the psychology of clutter. And this week, our theme is going to be work and productivity. I believe that clutter in a workspace has a lot of economic and just so many costs for employers and employees. So we're going to go into all of these topics today. And with us is Dr. Shelley Sommerfeldt. Hi, Shelley.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for joining us again. So we have a great topic today. And it's going to be very focused on productivity and workspace because I think it is really important. Companies sometimes are not really aware of how much the clutter in the workspace, it may be especially in the desks of people, but also just in the company itself when they have the corporate and then the plant in the same space. Right. I think it is so important for companies and for people who want to be productive to consider not having clutter in their spaces. Tell us a little bit about clutter and productivity.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's such an interesting topic because there are so many aspects to it that I think are taken for granted. Like you're saying, people don't have awareness to it. Or you may think of clutter being solely on the employee, like there being clutter at their desk, which is, something we will talk about today, and I think that plays a huge role. But also for companies, understanding the impact of having disorganized employees or clutter in the workspace for everyone in general. That also, the research shows that businesses really lose out financially. I was reading one study that stated that employers can lose up to 10% of the salary with a disorganized employee. And that employees, when they have a cluttered workspace or they don't have mechanisms in the workplace that are based in organization, like they can't find paperwork or they can't find something digitally, that we can spend up to over 4 hours a week just searching for paperwork. And when that happens, you're obviously losing out on productivity. So I think there's a huge role with the business. And then also for an individual, and as we've talked about before, high clutter, there's a strong link in the research with procrastination. So that obviously would be very hard for an employee to carry out their work task and be productive if they're procrastinating. If they're disorganized, can't find items. And it's also a big piece for the mental health component is it's very stressful when work tasks start piling up, you can't find anything. Your employer might not be supportive of like an organized workspace or helping you in that way. And then you're also really distracted. So it has a lot of impacts both for the employer and the employee that I don't think many people are aware of.
That is so true. I have, before I worked as a tidying consultant, I have 15, 20 years experience working at corporate world, and I've had both experience working for companies that only have the corporate site or they have the mixture between corporate and the plant. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that I learned, and there was no coincidence in life, no. I always lived like this change management or this change in space when both were the three companies that I worked for in all these years. They were making a transition from a closed workspace to an open workspace, or moving from the plant and dividing it to a corporate and the plant in another site. And there's so many things that I lived and saw and that are from personal experience. For example, one company that I worked for, I think I found it amazing, but it was so hard for so many people to work in that new concept. It was an open space concept. Mm-hmm. And plus that, we did not have desks assigned. So like there were 50 workspaces we each employee had a like at school you have what you call it? Wait, where you put all your stuff?
Like a cubby or a locker or something?
Yeah, we had a locker, exactly. We each had a locker. So at the end of the day and during the day, you really you couldn't have a lot of clutter on your desk, because the next day or at the end of the day, you had to pick up everything, because next day maybe somebody showed up earlier than you and they decided to sit by the window, or you had to, I don't know, prepare a report and you needed a lot of concentration. So you needed to go to a space that was more quiet and maybe more, far away from where everybody was working. So this was a great experience for me to work in a space like that. I think we were very efficient. Everybody was, because there was no opportunity to be cluttered.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah. But then you also find the other experience where you come to an office, they assign you a place which somebody else had lived in that space before you. And the first thing I always had to do was just take everything out. Normally there were a lot of papers of things that were past, gone, they just, and I always found the need to clean. And one time we did this cleaning in one of our companies, and we took out 5 tons of paper just from like my area. We were lucky to get some money for that paper, and we donated to a foundation. So as a company, you can also do that once you do the tidying process. But yeah, in our workspace, like in our desk, how does clutter affect our productivity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think similar as we've discussed in the past couple of episodes, having all that clutter around us that we're seeing on a regular basis, like we would in our homes, can again increase stress. It makes people feel like there's a lot to do because everything is very cluttered and they need to organize it, and they have probably procrastinated and not done so. It makes it harder to find things. It's more distracting. It can also have an impact on your overall mental, what would I like to call it, like a mental load, like in your mind. When we have so many tasks that we're keeping up with and we're trying to maintain, it just gets overwhelming. It's essentially, and I know I talked about this when we discussed the brain, but you're essentially overstimulating your brain when you have a lot of clutter, because again, it's all the different sensory processes. It's your visual system that's impacted, your olfactory, if there are smells coming from an environment. It's also sound. So there's so many different ways that clutter can impact us and impact our different senses, where then it's harder as an employee to carry out the task that you need to do. If you're distracted, you're overstimulated, you're mentally overloaded, you're stressed out. It just becomes a huge ball that's very hard to sift through and be more productive at.
Yeah, I've heard and I've read about how we are expected today to be like a multitask because we get interruptions in the office. People want to talk to us, or a phone call, or we need to go to a meeting, but then we come out. And then there's this idea that we can be multitask, but I've actually learned that what our brain really does is just like do all these switching off, switching on, switching off, switching off. So that is why also like we feel so stressed and so tired by maybe noon if we're doing this activity of turning on and off our brain, because we think that being multitask is something. This does happen to our brain, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And you're bringing up a good point where that's how the overloading can happen mentally, is when you have one task and you don't complete it and it's in your mind, and then you get distracted or you move on to something else, so you're multitasking. So now you're adding on another task in your brain, and then another one, where you're completely filled. And it can be really hard to accomplish any of those tasks at that point because you're overloaded, but also to accomplish them well. I think that's something that we can take for granted, and especially as this pertains to work, where if, like, sure, you may be multitasking, but is the quality of the work that you're doing on that one task really good? And most of the time people will acknowledge no. If they could clear out the other task and focus on one, that one task would probably be is the most, the best task at, the best quality that it could. But we don't tend to do that. We do tend to focus on multitasking, which really distracts us into many different areas where we're not putting in the full quality that we could.
Wow, that is great insight. I never thought of it that way, but yes, it's totally true. And I guess if an employer is listening to us, or just an entrepreneur, try not to multitask. Just, focus, don't procrastinate. I've heard there's like procrastination because you can't or you don't want to start something. You just put it off. But there's also a procrastination where you start something and something else grabs your mind or your attention and you go and do that. And then when you come back, I think it also relates. In our last session, we were talking about how, and I think I'm going to repeat it again because I really believe in it, and I just see it in my everyday, even with kids. You should also teach your kids. My kids say, okay, Mom, your 2-minute rule. Yes, my 2-minute rule is if you have to do something, do it right away, and don't procrastinate. Don't let it do it for later, because it will take, in what we're talking about, it will take your productivity down a lot, no? Right. I think it's very important. Normally, we want to be very productive, and we don't want to feel tired, and we want to do other things. So I think, procrastination, productivity is a great issue here.
One thing I was just going to jump in and say about the 2-minute rule and what you're saying with that too is that people don't realize that a lot of times the stress that we have in our lives or with work, that sometimes due to our own lack of time management, we've brought it upon ourselves. And what you're saying is a skill or a strategy at addressing that immediately. So if somebody has a work task and they know they can complete it, but they decide to delay it and they procrastinate, then all of a sudden you build more and you put on more and more, and then you're not realizing that by the time you need to go back and do task number 1, now it's at the deadline. You start getting stressed out. It becomes overwhelming, but you've essentially created that by not doing it right away. So if we did things right away and did not procrastinate, we would be much more effective and much more productive at work. And that also would help us to be less stressed.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, we could go on productivity and how to do it, but I think we want to touch on some other topics that we have for today, which are, within this topic. But sometimes we're not even aware of the types of clutter that we have in our spaces. And right. I think this is so important, especially today in the digital world, no? We not only have our physical spaces full of clutter, we also have our cell phones and our agendas and our emails, and just there's clutter everywhere.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I really think we can take for granted how much the digital world impacts us. And I love this topic, especially as a psychologist. There's so much about social media or just technology and the influence of our mental health and our lives. And a lot of people are aware that they should take breaks from technology or take breaks from their cell phones every once in a while and sort of unplug. But I don't think people realize how much it really does impact you, especially on a daily basis. I mean, we're really glued to our phones sometimes. And when you've got all the email notifications, you get text messages, you get phone calls, but you've also got work-related items, and it's all in the ease of our cell phones, which is wonderful, but that keeps us very distracted. For me, it's an interesting piece on having healthy and meaningful relationships, that when you're with someone, your time and energy should be placed with that person and your focus, and you should pay attention and be really mindful in that moment. But I see so often that instead people are very distracted, and their full attention is not on the person that they're with. They're checking their phone, or their phone beeps and they want to see what it is. And so having that constant digital clutter really can weigh heavily on us and be very distracting. And it does impact our relationships, and it impacts our productivity in a lot of different areas, where again, you're also mentally overloaded. Perhaps you're waiting on an email or somebody to get back to you, or you're doing too much multitasking and not able to attend to the present moment, which is really important to our happiness and enjoying our day-to-day life.
Yes, that is so true. I normally, I try to make people aware because, as you were saying, this all sort of is in our brain, no? But also in the physical world, and I try to talk to this, especially to, well, I think it pertains to everybody, but I don't think we even think about the space, the physical space, because it is a reality, and I think nobody really talks about it or even thinks about it. And there was a study in France that said if every French person would erase 40 emails from their inbox, that would be enough energy to like light up the Eiffel Tower, I think, for the rest, I don't know, for like a really long time. Because since we live in this digital world and we can just have, in our little cell phone, all of this information. Since I talk about spaces, and this is more the physical world than, you talk in terms of our mental health. Right. But in the physical world, I always tell people, have you ever thought how much energy, space, around the world somewhere, there has to be this huge brain, computer, site, whatever you want to call it, that has to keep all this information that we all have in our cell phones. It just doesn't like this cloud doesn't exist, There is an impact, and there is a need for a physical space, energy, to have, servers and IT sites have to be on 24/7, 365. And we've never, if you haven't made like this mental conscience, maybe I can help you making a physical conscience about how the digital clutter is really, like, if you're into environmental stuff and sustainability, it is really true that our clutter in our digital world, people don't take time to clean their inboxes, to clean photos that are blurred, or you just didn't know you took it, and then you have like all these videos. I would really would like to tell people that, and for companies, they have these huge sites, and sometimes they even say, we are going to erase all your personal information because it is real. It takes a physical space. No, and I don't think we make that conscience that all of this information, just because it's digital, it doesn't mean it's just like floating around somewhere. It has to take up a physical space. When you were talking about that, I was like, I need to say this because this is so important. People need to be more aware of our planet,
Right. Well, and it is a fascinating thing that it is essentially matter. It is kept somewhere, it is something. But in going back to the digital overload, I think too, when people, because you were talking about like deleting of things or getting rid of pictures, and I know that I've worked with people before where I've seen their cell phones, and they will have over 20,000 email notifications or a ton of, social media notifications that haven't been cleared out. And the issue about that is then it's so inefficient when they need, like, how do you find an email when you have 20,000 that are unread, and that, how do you get anything done? And that's incredibly distracting. So again, going back to productivity and efficiency and getting things done in an effective manner, when you're overloaded with digital information just as physical, it's incredibly hard to do that. Or finding pictures, as you had said too. And that's the same in the workplace. For employers, it's also important to take into account if they have shared files where you need to go and find forms, having those types of things very organized for employees just like you would a mailroom and you have slots where you might organize something, that digital organization is so important too that we often just don't think about.
Yeah. Another thing that I've experienced with corporate or businesses when I give them my workshop on why clutter is, or unclutter is important in their working spaces. Number one, yes, is the desk, but another thing that comes up a lot, and it doesn't have to do only with workspaces. It also talks about our home. But another thing that is important for companies is a health issue. There are studies that say that, the amount of days, I think it's like 9 days a year, where people don't go to work because they are sick, because their work environment, if you have clutter on your desk, and even if the company has, an outside provider for cleaning the desks of the employees, or whatever they do, there are like, I don't know, 4,000 or 400,000 germs in your keyboard. I mean, there are like very specific data on what germs there are, how the workspace is can be very unhealthy. No, if you have a chemical plant, or you're in I had a furniture plant, people making furniture, so it was wood, so there's all these little like things floating around. So I think health, because it impacts productivity in the workspace.
Right. I mean, again, it goes back to that idea of not being as effective because you're not even being clean in your space. And I like to relate this one a bit to relationships, because, again, being a relationship coach, like having effective relationships, meaningful relationships, and positive ones are so important to our overall happiness and mental health. And when a person doesn't keep their workspace clean, it actually can have a ripple effect to other people around them. I mean, I've worked with many clients who say they're coming in for a completely unrelated issue, but oftentimes they'll talk about their unhappiness at work. And I have literally heard people bring up like a coworker who procrastinates, who they can't count on, who can't get things done, but who also their desk is a mess, or it's gross, or they have food around. Or I've worked with somebody who's mentioned that their coworker, they were in a shared workspace that's open, so they had a large table that numerous employees sat at, and it was hard for them to get their job done because they had a coworker who was so disorganized that their stuff was bleeding into other people's workspaces, and it was very distracting for the other people who were sharing the space. So absolutely, I think kind of that health topic is something that we might not even think about, but that really does impact other people around you, in addition to your own safety and your employer.
That's so true. Yeah, yes, of course. And that at the end for a company and for productivity, or not a company, even if you're an entrepreneur, if you're not being productive, then you're not making the money you want to make. So this is also important. And wow, I think I've never had the experience of sharing a workspace with anybody, and I think I'm so glad for that and thankful. Maybe my coworker would hate me because I'm so tidy and
right.
That is funny. But also like security for companies, and that can have an economic impact too, depending on what industry you're talking about. But imagine you just spilled your coffee, or papers get lost, important papers get lost. So security, I think, is another issue that goes in hand with productivity, or the workspace. And even if we are entrepreneurs, or we're one man business, if we don't have our paperwork, just everything organized, we are going to take so much time. As you were saying, it's going to take us so much time to find whatever. And here again comes the 2-minute rule. Do it right now.
Right away, right.
But yeah, I think one of the problems that we have, and I think you're going to be the best one here to talk about strategies, but I think in this overwhelmed world with so many things to do, and everybody asks something from us, our spouse, our children, and even ourselves. We have too many things on our agenda.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And our spaces.
Yeah. Well, and that's that idea too, that clutter is not just physical. There's also mental, whether that's a mental to-do list or just all the demands and pressures that we have, which is one of the reasons why on each of these episodes when we've talked, I keep trying to highlight the correlation between clutter and stress, because I think that stress can really, it impacts everyone. And it's overwhelming, and it can make us really inefficient and have difficulties in lots of areas in our life. And so it really incorporates a huge amount, and I'd like to bring up the mindfulness, as I have in the past couple of sessions, just to kind of take a moment to take a step back and really be present with yourself and your environment. And that is actually very helpful in workspaces. There's a lot of research on how mindfulness can really increase our productivity at work. And many schools and workplaces both are incorporating mindfulness practice into their curriculum. I mean, now you've got children practicing mindfulness, and there are also many employers who will allow that space and even conduct mindfulness seminars or breaks throughout the day, where I think this is such a big issue for employers to be able to look at the things that they can do to support their employees, and having systems in place that are not just focused on physical clutter, but whether that's digital or mental overload is very important.
Yeah. I think anybody, if you're a business, if you're a one business, if you're 100 businessmen, mm-hmm. I think the most important thing, and this has to do with habits and tidying. Yes, you do need to have, we all have systems somewhere or another in our personal life, with our family, in our home, in our work environment. I think it is very important so that everybody knows what should be done, especially in workplaces, workspaces. When I find that the company, normally family companies have this because they don't really have like a specific process on how to do this. It's how do you do it? Well, however the boss or the owner, or, and in family businesses that are older or have been, handed down from one generation to another, how did you do this? Well, that's how my grandfather did it, no? Right. So we find that there are no specific processes on how to do things, and then it's so hard to maintain any type of order, and then you end up procrastinating, or you're not productive, or you have clutter. So it is very important. What other strategies do you think you could recommend that we could use for dealing with this situation?
Well, let me start with the employer again, just because I think the employer having some things set in place to support their employees is really important. And this would also go for entrepreneurs, as well, or even mom and pop shops where there's only a few employees. But I think, just as you had said before, having systems in place as the business themselves can really help an employee be more efficient in their work. And depending on the type of work you do, you may only get paid when you're efficient. So this can really have a high motivation for everyone, that we really want to be effective at our jobs and be productive, because we're either our income is dependent upon it, or promotion, or whatever it may be. So that's very important. And again, I think employers supporting their employees by encouraging cleanly environments, by providing opportunities, whether that's mindfulness or other mental health support, is really important. Also ensuring that the employer has things in place, whether, again, that organization of digital files, of paper files. And I know you had brought this up a little while ago about the cleanliness of the workplace. There's a study that shows that cleaning personnel who come in and clean office space, they can actually increase the production of the office space by 40% simply because they are cleaning it, and it creates a better work environment for employees. So it's something very small that you wouldn't think, but it's got a huge impact by just having an employer supplying like a cleaning crew to help facilitate a good work environment. Is also very helpful. And as much as employees may hate it, but having deadlines and timelines, they may cause us stress, or we may hate having, somebody watching over us, but employers maintaining timelines and that sort of mental organization, in a sense, it's a little bit physical, but also a mental organization system where you're saying, hey, by this Friday at this time, this is due. Those types of systems in place also can be very beneficial for the employee and their effectiveness, as much as they may dislike having that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that has an impact because we're all not the same. No, we're not as organized. Everybody's not as organized. Some people are just different. Within a workspace or a company, it is very important. That's why all these processes exist within a company. But as you said, if you're an entrepreneur, you also need to put in place these systems for you to work. I'm going to share some strategies that I think I also share with my clients in terms of productivity. And then I wish you could also help us with some strategies for mental productivity within the workspace, or, we have talked about also time management, because sometimes in the workspace, we need like these specific, very real strategies. One is the 5-50 productivity rule, where you have 5 tasks to do, or 5 slots of time, because that's returning to our main topic about how our brain works, and how many decisions we have to make, and how our brain does. And you were talking about how we may finish the task, but we're not doing the best way possible. So the 5-50 productivity rule says work for 50 minutes and then have a 10-minute break, and then so on. No, and then you work in these like time slots that are 50, 5 minutes, 5 slots of time for 50 minutes, and then take those 10 minutes, as you said, go out into, if you have an office space that has a green area, go there, go get hydrated, because our body also needs that. Maybe answer the phone, or something that is bothering you and taking your mind from that concentration goes, you have to make a deposit, or you have to call home or something. No, just do it. Like if we have these little slots, sometimes people think that if they do that, they're going to be less productive. Yeah. And it's been shown and demonstrated by many people who study this, that we are more productive when we have when we take those times and we have those slots. It's so funny because people think it's the other way around. And then
if I can jump in real quick on that one, just to really agree with you, there's tons of research, just as you're saying, that shows us actually that a shorter work day, we are more productive and effective than this long overdrawn day. And so many people try to push themselves for 8, 10, 12-hour days, when in fact the research shows these 5-6 hour work days, people are way more effective. Also, the research shows us that I forgot the term, but the work schedules that are more flexible than like a rigid schedule, people are also more productive with that. And I think in the United States, there's this obsession for work, and everything surrounds work and money, and it's too much and too long of a day, where people get really overwhelmed, where it's exactly what you're saying, that people unfortunately have the misconception that the harder they work, the more productive they're going to be, when in fact, if you would slow down and do a few things effectively, you would be much more productive. So
yeah, well, that doesn't only happen in the States. I think Mexico is the top of unproductive because we work so many hours, but we're really not being productive. So if you're an entrepreneur, or if you're an owner of a company and you want your productivity to increase, then you should take into consideration these things, because it's not only Shelley and I saying it. It just, there's so many studies everywhere. And I think one of the last things that I would add, or I could give as a tip, is we really need to take a lot of things out of our agenda. No, we live a lot in, I know we have family and our children and spouse and friends and family and everybody, but we can go back to the methodology that I try to teach my clients. First, you need clarity. No, and so you need to do your things first, and then go into other people's agenda, because the world is always going to be asking for our time, and for our, everybody's going to be wanting a response from us, time with us. So, and instead of trying to fit those people's agenda, first do your things. Take a lot of things out of your agenda, because there's a lot of things that I know, that you shouldn't be doing them. And then you will have time to sit really, as you said, in a mindful way with your children, pray with your children, be with your spouse, go to the movies, have coffee with your girlfriend, and really be in the present moment with that person, whoever that person is. No?
Right. No, exactly. I mean, I think that leads me in beautifully to kind of my point about how mental health is tied into work and productivity, with the decrease of like our physical work clutter as well as our mental. And it really does require that shift in your mindset. And what you're describing as in an overall way is, again, like living your life with intention, meaning you are finding the priorities of what things are important. And oftentimes people are cluttered in their lives, exactly as you described. They've got demands from various family members and children and work and, all sorts of stuff, which sometimes we can't get away from all of that, but often we can do better organization with the priorities in our life and what comes first. And sometimes for people, they may put demands of all these other people and work, and then their own mental health, their physical health, and their own happiness is at the very bottom. And then they can't figure out why they're overwhelmed and stressed and unhappy with their life. And it really does take a shift in one's mindset to change that around, to have more happiness and production and effectiveness in your life. But I think going back to this idea of being too overloaded, that work is a huge component of that, and as well as so much in our personal life, that it really does take decluttering in our own lives. And that in of itself will actually increase our work productivity and benefit us, in our happiness and our relationships, without even realizing it's going to have that ripple effect.
That is so true. Well, our time is up for today. I mean, we would love to keep speaking with you and talking about this, because there's so much information and tips we can give you, and so much of this is so important for us to consider. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please post, follow us on our social media. Let us know what you think. We will be very happy to respond to any of your comments or your questions. And we look forward to seeing you in our 4th session. That will be our last session next Thursday. We will be talking about happiness, and we will share with you many things, as we have shared in the last 3 sessions, about how to become, be, and reach that happiness that we all want. Thank you, Shelley, for being today here with us, and we look forward to next week.
Thank you.
Bye.